Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is Jeff Jones, and with me today is the partial panel. We'll start from the top and say hello to Big Jeff first. Hey, Big Jeff, how are you doing today? Nice to see you, buddy. Good evening.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me back. It's great to be here. I really got a strong feeling this is going to be a great episode. I like the title of this episode. I didn't pay much attention to the titles the first time I went through, first couple of times I went through. Trust no one, boy. What a great, a fitting title, because every time you turn around, somebody is up to some type of shenanigans. And you really can't trust one damn thing that one person says who has any type of authority in this case. So I'm glad my friends are here below. We're going to dig into the evidence and we're going to rip it apart. So this is going to be a good one. Can't wait.
I'm right there with you, Big Jeff, on Trust No One. You just think back to last week with Fallon and his runner of end run, let's call it end around, let's call it around KZ, and Trust No One. Yeah, absolutely. And Kel, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, everyone. I'm okay. Yeah, it's going to be a great episode, and they might not have been able to trust anyone in that time, but I trust everyone on the panel and everyone in chat. So let's get started.
That's what I'm talking about, Kel. That's a transition. That's what we do in the pros. We hit triples and home runs. We don't need base hits, right? Absolutely. And Dr. Silkman, it's good to have you back again. Welcome.
Hey, Jeff, and hi, panel. It's great to be here, and a big warm welcome to everyone in chat. Yeah, really looking forward to this episode. And, the guys on the panel are correct. Trust no one, especially in this case. Let's get on with it, guys.
And things like that. So,
one of the interesting things about the dismemberment in this case, the people that are Denny suspects are deer hunters. And in deer hunting, when a deer is dressed, it's what you're saying. It's a nice way of saying you're dismembering, and the meat's removed, and then you're dismembering the skeleton.
I think if you come from Chicago and you go, these people were deer hunters. Okay, wow, that's interesting. That you don't have everybody's a deer hunter in Manitowoc County. Everybody would have had this skill. And so being like just our Denny suspects that, they were deer hunters. I think I'm just going to just be fair and say my truth. And that is, I think it's a little unfair of a characterization of these people are deer hunters. That's the only thing that I want to bring up. And if you guys want to comment, cool. If not, we'll let it slide.
Well, the question that I have for you on that, Jeff, is I wonder if she's more talking about the tools that might have been used to do the dismemberment as opposed to knowing, potentially how to field dress a deer. And, I fully believe that, 60% of the men knew how to, dress a deer. I can tell you that Stephen Avery was not one. He was not a hunter. Never got bit by the hunting bug. I think he went hunting once. We know that he applied for a license and was able to get that hunting license despite the fact that he was a so-called felon, and you need to shoot to get that license. But I think I'm wondering if she's really talking about the tools, right? Because not doing it myself, but I've heard from others who do it, that the tools that you use are exceptionally fine kerf tools that are just extremely sharp. So I was wondering if you could comment on that, if you know what those tools are, and how does the kerf of those tools compare to, say, the kerf of like a hacksaw?
What I can say is that those tools would be ubiquitous. They'd be everywhere if everyone's a hunter, whether it's in my uncle's garage or if it's in my neighbor's garage, or I do believe they have specific tools. I did a little research on finding they have a quite specific sharper and smaller knife than we would think. We're thinking these big saws, and he's showing us all these big saws in this demonstration of all the tools he has. From what I saw, it's almost smaller. It's like you want this really small kind of maneuverable knife to cut the ligaments, to cut this part, to cut that part. And so Um, I don't know. At that point, would you be like, I need to cut this person up. Let me use my deer hunting tools to do this. Now, that seems like a mistake to me to use your own tool, but I don't know, Big Jeff. That's a good question. It is a good question. I think maybe someone in chat, because I know sometimes we have people that join us in chat that are hunters that maybe could be able to give us a little indication on that. As I said, my knowledge is limited, but
I just can't imagine. I mean, it's a horrific crime. I just can't imagine using a hacksaw. Just how many swipes of a hacksaw it would take to actually sever. It's just unthinkable. But if you have a tool designed to field dress a deer, is it fewer? I mean, maybe the hunters can comment on that too. Like how, is it just swiping you're done, or is it really,
well, from
what is it?
again, the minimal experience I have with this, and I have done a little, like very little bit, and I've witnessed some of it. Basically, the technique, and I hope those people in chat can back me up if I'm right or correct me if I'm wrong. And that is, it would be strange to try to just cut through the bone, because what you're trying to do is you're separating the ligaments, right, from the elbow, let's say, or you're separating the ligaments and the tendons, and maybe Cal and Dr. Silkman can comment more about the connections of your joints. I don't think that you would go at it and just take a hacksaw to the middle of an arm and start going, you know what I'm saying? Like what the process of the field dressing is to take it apart at the ligaments, because that's the easiest part. That's why I've always thought that this was so wild to see all these cut marks on the bone. I think it's out of place and strange in my own mind.
Well, I think I agree with Big Jeff, and I also agree with you, Jeff. I think basically what Kathleen Zellner was trying to imply here is that you need some type of anatomical skill and anatomical knowledge in order to dismember a human being if you're going to do it properly. And essentially, if we're talking about deer hunters in Wisconsin, we're talking probably thousands and thousands of people who would hunt deer and dress deer. So, it's non-specific. So if you believe that whoever dismembered Teresa Halbach was a deer hunter, then it's non-specific, right? Because there are literally potentially thousands of people that have that skill. But I agree with Big Jeff. I think the point that Kathleen is trying to make here is that you need the right equipment in order to dismember somebody if you're going to do a good job at it. And in addition, you need anatomical skill. You know where to cut in the bone, right? Because potentially it is a bloody and messy job to dismember a human being, right? There's literally going to be blood and other matter absolutely everywhere. Now, I know that Kelly works in the medical field. She can comment on it. But what we don't see, or just one point before I continue. What we do have is a bone fragment from Yonder Burn Barrel number 2, right? And what's important about that particular fragment is that it's got hesitation cut marks, which means that someone attempted to cut the bone multiple times and then stopped. That's what a hesitation cut mark is. The cut mark hasn't gone all the way through, which is very, very interesting. So, I think what Kathleen Zellner was saying was a little bit cheeky, trying to imply that potentially Bobby Dassey, Scott Tadich, who are deer hunters, maybe had something to do with Teresa Halbach's demise. It's really non-specific. You know what I mean? There are many, like you said, Jeff, there are thousands of people in Wisconsin who have that skill, how to dress a deer. But it is very interesting that no one, as in no one from the state, determine what type of blade was used to cut up the bones.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch base on much of this because I'm not a hunter. I've never hunted. So in terms of that, that's out of my, realm of knowledge. So I'm not going to go there in terms of that. I just want to say that there is so many variables in terms of like what you guys addressed, which was on point. But like for example, we're talking about hesitation marks. So that, to me, as an outsider looking in, that's just using, like, what is it, theoretical kind of, I don't know, common sense. I can look at it like somebody who actually didn't have much skill hunting. That's why there was hesitation marks, because they weren't quite confident what they were doing in terms of the anatomy and in terms of just carving up meat in general, whether it's a deer or any other kind of hunting skills that they've experienced. But then on the other side, you have to look at it like cutting up a deer and cutting up a human is two very one end of the spectrum kind of experiences, while you're, because you'd have to get up close and personal, especially if you're using some kind of saw. And that kind of takes me to the next thing is I've always considered, okay, then why a saw? Why do you need it clean? The job done? Why not a chainsaw? And then how does that all kind of go into it? There's been famous serial killers or killers out there that have dismembered bodies and used just a chainsaw in their own bathroom. What's the difference? Well, they live alone, and they didn't, the noise concept of it wasn't an issue in a sense, where if you're on a property or you're surrounded by potential people to be able to hear it, you might have to limit to a saw so you're not drawing in attention. These are all the things that I think about in terms of the whys and the hows, but I totally understand the whole perspective that you guys have come in terms of what Kathleen was trying to address here. I think that it is very open in terms of it is a area of hunters. It literally could, in terms of a profile, a lot of people could hit that profile marker.
Yeah, I can see, if I don't mean to be morbid about this, and if it was me doing it, I would definitely use a power tool. I would not even think that I could even do this with a hand tool. That's kind of nasty. And I think like a sawzall would be, an electric tool, not a chainsaw with a little chain on it that has a very wide curve, but something that you use to cut through maybe a 2x4 to get do some preliminary demolition. I do have a medical question for the panel, and we're blessed to have both Kelly and Dr. Silkman, who have a lot of medical experience. It's always struck me as a man miracle, that certain things survived through a fire that was able to reduce bones to, remains the size of fingernails. And it just seems to me that the nature of the way things burn, the longer that something is exposed to the heat, the more of a chance it has to get reduced to the powder and not be left as it remains. It just seems to me that if you make a cut, it isn't the stuff at the end, or the stuff that's exposed going to be the stuff that's exposed to the most heat and therefore the most likely to be reduced to ash. How is it that why is it, do you think, that the saw marks or the kerf marks actually survive? I mean, you could make the same comment about the skull fragments that have the bevel. You think with those being exposed, that would be sort of the first thing to be exposed to the heat. Why is it that you suppose that they survive those pieces?
Dr. Eisenberg, as well as others, have noted that there was surviving muscle tissue. It automatically implies that Teresa Halbach was not cremated in a professional crematorium, right? In a professional because there's a lot of, conspiracy theories that her body was taken away and placed in a crematorium. That cannot be the case, because the crematoriums reach such a temperature that the only thing that you're going to have left are bones. Now, it tends to suggest that Teresa Halbach was very likely cremated in a burned barrel. Now, the reason why you dismember somebody to basically for ease of transportation, right? It's very hard to move a body in whole, and the actual torso weighs a lot because you have the internal organs. and they dismember a body so it's much easier to transport. Now, if you dismember a body and you got body limbs, it's going to be easier to burn because you've got a greater surface area, right? So hence, you can easily place an arm, a leg, a head in a burn barrel, for say, and cremate those parts. But trying to cremate a torso is going to be a lot of problems because it contains your gut bacteria, it contains your large bowel, it contains your organs. It's going to be a real mess. So the problem is, if you cut into the torso, you're going to be in big strife because you've got all the intestines. You really have to know what you're doing, right? So the question is, why do some of the bones survive? And why would some of the muscle tissue survive? It all is dependent on how those pieces are placed within the burn barrel and whether they are co-burned with other parts, right? So if a body part is, say, next to something else, it may not get the direct heat exposure that another part will, and hence it won't burn as much.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat much from that. Dr. Silkman literally said exactly what I would have said. For me, it's the direct heat aspect of it. In terms of the crematorium that Dr. Silkman brought up, as you know, I went to a crematorium and I even took the pictures. I explained. They were really, really kind and spoke to me. They addressed it immediately. They said, no, that's not a professional job in terms of her body being turned to ash and bone, because the way that they have structured it, it has direct heat and it's a controlled direct heat. So every from head to toe is completely being sourced the fire. So just want to cover that bit. Dr. Silkman hit the points with in terms of why you dismember a body. Transport is definitely one of them. And the other bit of research that I also did, transport was definitely up there, but it was also to eliminate DNA. And that was DNA of the person, the victim themselves, and the perpetrator. That is one of the main reasons why a lot of them burn their victims, especially if it's an SA case, because they are fearing that they have left themselves potentially on the body or in other orifices, if you know what I mean. So yeah, in terms of that, and the direct heat is definitely the main source of why there would be a difference in contrast of what was burnt more, what was burnt less. And I have to agree, the way you said making a murderer man miracles with the bones, it is, because let's look at what did survive. We have a skull fragment that showed that there was a bullet wound. So they were able to establish a method of death, or a contribution of method of death. And then you have the charred muscle that just happened to survive so that they could pull a certain element of DNA and do a comparison. So I totally agree in terms of the making a murderer miracle side of it. It is interesting that the bits that needed to survive to be able to create a narrative and a story were there.
Hacksaw blades are used, sharp knives are used, and a person would have some awareness of anatomy, of cutting into a joint and how to do that effectively. So it's different than the average person who might be repulsed by the idea of dismembering. It's still hard to imagine anyone could dismember a human body, but certainly they have some of the mechanical skill that would be necessary for dismembering that you wouldn't see in other cases.
On top of what Kathleen's saying, although she's making really valid points in terms of, the skill and the knowledge that the person would need, I actually kind of, in a sense of my own, kind of disagree. And that's only because of the statistics and the other cases that I've read where dismemberment has been a part of a case. Those people weren't actually hunters or have foreknowledge. They'd probably never even hunt. They might not have ever hunted before because they were city boys or city girls, women, whatever. But my point is, when your adrenaline is in full force, whether you have all the other variables of being under the influence of drugs, whether you have a mental illness, it doesn't categorize you as a hunter. You have a job, you have potentially committed a crime, and you will potentially go away for the rest of your life. It's a fight or flight moment. So you would be in a sense willing to do things you didn't think you'd be possible of if it means you won't get caught. So I don't think it just categorizes someone needs to be a certain person to be able to do it. It goes with the territory of what mindset you're in to make those decisions to not get caught.
And this is very, very interesting because we have spent a lot of time looking at Brendan Dassey's so-called coerced confession to both Fassbender and Wiegert. And it's very interesting here, guys, that we absolutely know from an anatomical point of view that Teresa Halbach was dismembered, right? There's proof. There are cut marks in the bones. There's no doubt that she was cut to pieces, as horrific as that is. It's very interesting that when Fassbender and Wiegert had asked Brendan Dassey, all right, how did you get rid of the body? And Brendan even drew the picture. Remember, guys, that he picked up Teresa Halbach from the legs. Stephen had picked Teresa Halbach from the shoulders, and they placed Teresa Halbach in the burn pit whole, as in no dismemberment, none whatsoever. And it's rather remarkable that, you know, this is what's called insider knowledge. That is, Fassbender and Wiegert absolutely knew that Teresa Halbach was cut to pieces. And if you read the so-called coerced confessions, Fassbender and Wiegert spend a lot of time hinting, was she cut up? Did he mention this? Did you use the chains? Did you use the ropes in your garage? And the reason why they said that to Brendan, because that's exactly what Ed Gein did to one of his female victims, strung her up and cut her to pieces, right? And Brendan had no idea what the hell they were talking about, right? And it's remarkable that despite the detectives, the investigators, knowing that Teresa Halbach was cut to pieces, Brendan Dassey told them a completely different story. And furthermore, I think we already know that Brendan is very sensitive to the sight of blood, right? He faints. Now, come on, guys. Are we in La La Land here? How can a kid like that, 16-year-old kid, who's never been in trouble with the law or anybody else, now has the courage and strength to witness someone being shot 10 times and then cut to pieces? There's something not right here, guys. And the other thing, of course, are both the cadaver and scent dogs failing to hit and make a beeline for the burn pit. Now, we know that there is surviving muscle tissue. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but that's a strong indicator for a cadaver dog to hit upon, because that's the classic definition of human decomposition. A cadaver dog like Brutus would have made a headline for that burn pit, even if Bear was there. Because, Kelly, back me up if you can, but that's what a cadaver dog is trained for, to detect human decomposition. When you got muscle tissue there, that's exactly what a cadaver dog is trained for.
That would be, of course,
Absolutely.
unless there was only one piece of muscle tissue and they found the only one piece of muscle tissue that there was, right? As a quick aside, I recently watched a YouTube video. The guy's name, I think, he's like Mark Rober. But yeah, this whole video is him trying to fool a bloodhound, and he's doing things like getting a dozen people there, wiping the scent, everybody's scent on this thing, giving it to the bloodhound to follow, but the bloodhound is able to track him down, even though the scent of 12 other people is on the thing. It's amazing. Maybe we can throw the link to that video in the description so people can get an idea of what dogs are really capable of. In this case, they're literally trying to fool the dog. That's his video. Can he sort of get to a place and hide in this place without the dog being able to find him? And he walks through water and everything else, and the dog's like, oh, water holds the scent better than the ground, apparently. So it's just it's amazing what they can do.
For dismembering that you wouldn't see in other cases. Dr. Eisenberg documents the equivalent, I think it adds up to 1.7 pounds of skeletal remains.
Yeah.
And on a cremation, what's the weight of a body when you don't have missing bone?
There's around 10 pounds or so, depending on the person and the cremation technique and everything else.
So we're
looking at 10 or 20%, and that's nowhere near the real story. And I think the jury's getting the same thing. I don't think they're getting everything. We see a lot of the bodies.
But this is the biggest mystery. There's around about 50 to 60% of her skeletal remains that are unaccounted for. Now, remember what Dr. Symes just said. Even when you use a professional crematorium, some of the bones, yes, they can turn to ash, but you get a certain weight back when you cremate a human being, right? So there's an actual mathematical formula based on your height, weight, etc., how much cremains you should get back from a cremation event. I can't understand where the other 60% of Teresa Halbach is. And don't forget that no bones have actually been tested. No DNA has been extracted from any bone, only from muscle tissue. So the question is, how can you cremate somebody and you cannot account for up to 60% of the skeletal remains? And where are the teeth? Where are the crowns of the teeth? There's something weird going on. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but only 35% of her skull has ever been recovered. Where's the rest of her skull? Where's the rest of her body?
It's a mystery, but yet the miracle that Kel likes to point out is that she puts it better than me. I'm going to try and paraphrase it correctly. That bones from every major anatomical area were discovered in the burn pit. How'd they get there, right? If I had to cut it up and I did some of it in the burn barrel, which only makes sense, right? I mean, there wasn't enough heat and there wasn't enough time to do it in the open fire pit. We agree that it was probably done in a burn barrel to reflect the heat back. It was the only way to get that much heat and do it in any type of reasonable amount of time. Arguably, he didn't have even enough time then, but how did those bones end up back in the burn pit? What did he take the burn barrel and dump it back into his own burn pit? It just doesn't make sense. I just don't get it.
Represented, but a lot of the bones are not there. And when you burn up a body, for example, the ribs, you got 24 ribs, and they're fragile, but they're hard to burn up. There should be rib fragments everywhere, and I just don't see that. So I think and vertebra, I don't see. The vertebral bodies are spongy bone. They survive a fire quite well, even after calcined. They stand up pretty well.
You know, I hate to say, and it's something I was just going to add to that, and he just kind of walked me into this question, and that is, you know, there was a back and forth in the trial between experts about where was the primary burn location. And is this what we're touching on right here, where you're saying, where's the rest of her? How can this be the primary burn location when we're missing 60% of her remains? You know, and I think that's kind of where I can tie it back into the trial.
So, the obvious follow-on question is, how important to the state's narrative was it that the Stevens burn pit was the primary burn site? It was absolutely essential to their argument, is the answer to that question.
We're just missing bones that hold up in a fire. I don't see them. I don't see much.
What would be the explanation for bones being missing? It wasn't the fire that destroyed them.
Well, I can tell you what I see over and over. People think it's easy to burn a body up, and it's not. And when they get frustrated and you still have the whole core body left after you burned off everything else, you take that and dump it someplace else. I've seen that in this country numerous times. I've seen it internationally numerous times.
These bones in the quarry, I'm going to take about 20 seconds to talk.
What Dr. Symes was talking about tragically occurred with Christine Rudy. Okay. She was shot in the head by her husband. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, I believe 6 months pregnant. She was dismembered. Her limbs were burnt in a burn pit. And guess what? Her torso was thrown in the Chippewa River, right? Because the torso, like I said before, is very, very hard to burn because it contains a lot of bones and organs. And isn't that interesting that with Teresa Horbach, we have a lot of her, a high proportion of her bones cannot be accounted for.
Best anybody can say is that they're possible human. What does possible human mean? Well, it means we don't know what it is. All right? The best anthropologists in the world don't know what these bones are.
Jeff?
Even through testing what's called.
Do you think the best anthropologists in the world can tell the difference between baby bird bones and human fetal bones?
That's right. Dr. Eisenberg really fucked up. Mind you, it was the Christine Rudy. It was the Christine Rudy case, and I was just thinking about this today, and I reckon that's the reason why Dr. Eisenberg refused to classify that bone in the Manitowoc County gravel pit as human. She was terrified of making another mistake, an embarrassing mistake, when she called the bones in the burn pit in the Christine Rudy case as being human, fetal, and they ended up being an animal. That's pretty embarrassing.
I think we covered it on a previous podcast, but it does. I'll ask this as a question to either Cal or Dr. Silkman. What does it take? What type of test does it take to determine whether or not say, for example, the pelvic bone that's found in the quarry, to make a determination as to whether that's human or not, and how long? What kind of test and how long?
All Dr. Eisenberg had to do was place it under a microscope. All she had to do was place it under a microscope and examine the internal structure of the bone. And it was rather remarkable because we went through this in the testimony, and Fallon had actually asked her whether she had done further testing, and she said no. And all she had to do was literally place the bone on a compound microscope, a stereo microscope, examine the internal structure, and have a look. See, basically a human bone has got an outer layer, the cortical layer, and an internal honeycomb structure. And that pelvic bone that's at the Manitowoc County gravel pit had already been sliced open, right? We can see actual images of it. All she had to do was place it under a microscope. She didn't do it. And the other thing that she could have done was use antibodies, right? So you've got human antibodies and animal antibodies, and all you do is you apply them to the bone and you look at which antibodies bind the strongest. If more animal antibodies bind to the bone, it's very likely animal in origin. If more human antibodies bind to the bone, it's very likely to be human.
Called mitochondrial DNA testing, whether they're human or not, could not, even by the FBI, be determined. So the bones in the quarry are really not evidence in this case. And so Mr. Strang's made a big deal out of showing you maps and a little flag and things like that about possible bones. Again, speculation, conjecture is not part of this case. Facts are going to be what decides this case.
Well, the fact that he said the bones in the quarry have nothing to do, they're not evidence in this case. It's just like, what? You can tell me bones, human bone? Well, then there's somebody else's bone. If those bones aren't related, then it's somebody else's bone.
This is the point. Dr. Eisenberg examined all of the cremains. And you know what her conclusion was? No duplicate bones, one victim. One. Which means that those bones in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, the bones from the Yonder burn barrel and the supposed bones from Stephen Avery's burn pit all come from one human being who happened to be an adult female.
Which
Now,
is why what you said earlier, that Ken Kratz is just a flat out lie right there, because
Absolute
it's not what his expert said.
No,
right?
weapons grade bullshit.
And this is his closing arguments, right? At this point?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. He was basically trying to dismiss everything that the defense came up with, that potentially there were human bones in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. And lo and behold, what does Dr. Eisenberg write in her report? Cut human burnt bones in, I think there were 3 quarry poles in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, totally saying, going against what Ken Kratz said in court.
The way that Buting and Strang are looking at Ken Kratz, like, you've got to be kidding me with what you are saying, and I wish I could object to this foolishness.
So that in the defense, you've got to establish that she was killed elsewhere. And here are a pile of human bones in the gravel pit where the suspected pelvis is. And those bones have been documented by the state expert as being human, not possibly human, but human. And then some of them have cut marks on them. So between the defense attorney and their expert, that's what you really call dropping the ball. So the jury's sitting there having the state just minimize the pelvic bone. I mean, Kratz said that he would spend no more than 20 seconds on it, but he would have had to spend a lot more time on numerous human bones over there, with some of which had cut marks on them. That might have given him pause past 20 seconds. But certainly with the jury, that would have been a huge part of the argument that was made, that she wasn't killed on the Avery property. She left the Avery property. She was killed, dismembered, and burned over in the gravel pit.
That bone that was found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit is part of a pelvic bone. Well, guess what Dr. Bennett found in the box of bones that allegedly came from the Stephen Avery's burn pit? Part of an ilium bone, which is part of the human female pelvis. Now, I want to ask a question to the panel and also to people in chat. How on earth do you explain how part of a pelvis is present in the burn pit and the other part of the pelvis is present in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, what, half a mile away? Come on, guys. And that bone fragment in the Manitowoc County gravel pit is the only articulated bone found. And that means 2 bone fragments were joined together, co-joined. All the other bone fragments were completely separate.
Well, I think the point is that the state's narrative certainly, had no chance of, encompassing, the geographic distribution of the bones. The story that Ken Kratz spun for the jury had the crime being committed within a 100-foot radius, if you will, and sort of kept in that 100-foot radius, which I guess is probably much more believable, to a jury anyways, if that's the narrative that you're going to spin. It horrifies me that the Court of Appeals, just sees fit to say, oh, well, any of this stuff that you find doesn't really matter, because it doesn't, he could have done it anyway. He just, he decided to go on a golf cart ride. He scooped up some of the bones, went on a golf cart ride, and tossed them around. Just because you find something there and it's human doesn't mean anything. To me, it just galls me that that when the facts that you find, sort of would force the state to deviate in their narrative to such a large extent, especially at a point that they tried to dismiss in the trial, right? Oh, those aren't even human, right? For the Court of Appeals to say something doesn't matter, because it's not proof of innocence. It just doesn't make any sense to me. There's something broken about the legal system when the Court of Appeals can just sort of, ignore the narrative that the jury heard, especially on a point that was dismissed by the prosecution. And that, to me, I don't get it. It's galling, but essentially that's what they've done, despite the fact that I think your points are logical, and to me, they're exculpatory.
Well, that's right, and don't forget that Travis Growell, I think on the evening of the 31st, smelt that foul odor, right? And he was at the rock crusher next to County Highway Q. Now, isn't that interesting, right? He recalled smelling this horrible smell that was drifting across.
Was it the first? Was his affidavit for the 1st or the 31st?
I think it was for the 31st, because he had clocked in. I'll double check it, but he was working near the rock crusher, and he had smelt this horrible foul smell come across. Now, you look at where Stephen Avery's burn pit is, and you have a look at where the Manitowoc County gravel pit is, right? Now, Growell was in Redon's quarry, but very close to where the Manitowoc County gravel pit is. And he was able to smell a foul smell. You have a look where Stephen Avery's burn pit is. That's a long way away for a smell to drift across, and nobody in the Dassey residence had complained about a foul smell. Now, how do you work that one out, guys? Something is not adding up here.
Nor did Earl Avery or Travis Fabian. Robert Fabian.
Correct.
Who stopped by Stevens on the golf cart while they were rabbit hunting on the night of the 31st. But yet Bloodhound Fabian does claim that he smelled the smell of plastic burning from Stevens' burn barrel, which is out in front of his house. But he detected no odor of a burning
body. Correct.
Right where her cell phone activity puts her, all of it fits. And cases always fit. When you find out what the truth is, it all fits. So the goal here is to get to the truth of what happened to Teresa Halbach. We're not trying to just stir up trouble. We're trying to find out what actually happened to her. And what the state said happened to her isn't remotely close to what happened to her.
Significant evidence has been discovered over the past 24 hours at the Avery salvage yard.
I found out from the media that there was possibly some remains found on the Avery property. There was a press conference that was on television, I believe it was November 9th, around 3 p.m., that was confirmed.
They feel that the evidence that has been collected and that they are analyzing is that of human in nature.
Prior to that, I had no knowledge or reports given to me by police or detectives. I did keep some notes when things started with hearing things in the media, phone calls. So I did keep notes, dates, times. I called Officer Wiegert, Detective Wiegert, that evening of the 9th. And at that point, he told me they just overlooked calling me. And I told him I wanted to come out to the scene. They told me the scene was closed for the night. And I said, okay, that's fine, but why didn't you give us some kind of report, some kind of a heads up as to what was going on? And then he commented to me at that time very rudely, well, I don't have to call or tell you about bones.
Wow. I had to stop it because I had to pick this part out before we go any further, and that is Mark Wiegert. Oh, it slipped my mind to call the coroner. It just slipped my mind. Now,
oops,
is that someone that you want to promote to sheriff? It's not really related to what we're talking about, but this is the guy who forgets to call the coroner. And, oh, you know what? That guy who's always on – wait, no, he's not always on point. He forgets to do stuff. We've seen him make mistakes. He's got. This is the guy that gets promoted. I'm sorry. This is outrageous that she was treated the way she was treated. Not only, but kept out of the loop enough is the issue here. I think the issue is that she was kept out of the loop.
In a normal murder case, when an individual finds what they suspect to be a bone, you stop. You immediately stop. The very first bone was found by Sergeant Jason Jost on November the 8th at about 1:30. You stop. If you suspect a bone to be human in nature, and you're obviously doing a murder investigation, you immediately stop. You don't touch anything. First person you call is the coroner. The coroner comes in with their team that includes a forensic anthropologist. They shut down the scene, they kick everybody out, and they document the crime scene with photographs and a video and a grid. Absolutely none of that was done. In fact, there are no in situ photographs of any bone on November the 8th. And now Erdl, remember guys, Erdl, he provided his sifting equipment for the burn pit, and they quickly sifted the burn pit, and then they left at about 5:30 because it was getting dark. Erdl was asked by Fassbender, why didn't you take any photographs of the burn pit? You know what he said? Because it's been obviously altered. Obviously altered. So Erdl had the nous to realize that something was not kosher at the burn pit. Something was weird. He refused to take any photographs. Now, to make matters worse, remember what Deborah Kakach just said? I found out on November the 9th. You know when the burn pit was processed for the second time? On November the 10th by Pevito. Now, wait a minute. How come they still didn't invite Deborah Kakach to come to the burn pit and re-examine it on November the 10th like Pevito did? And the answer is they didn't want Kakach anywhere near the burn pit because she would have determined if there were shenanigans, it would have taken her 5 seconds to work that out. You can't have that.
Well, I know where you don't want to go, but I'm not afraid to go there. We know, just if you want to go back, I think it's still probably the Fall Play Library, the interview that we did with Deb Hochstetler. Is that still in the Fall Play Library, Dr. Silkman? I assume it is.
Oh yeah, that was a ripper, that one.
And Deb's son Ricky actually got hit by a car on the night of, or we hit by something. I don't know, could be a truck or someone on a night that they were having a blizzard. Now, Deb Hochstetler is good friends with Deb Kadich. I think they're neighbors, as a matter of fact. I think their children were good friends. Ricky, her son that was lost, was good friends with one of Deb's kids. And just so happens that there was sort of that night the snowstorm was, there was a party, like a Christmas party type of thing, or New Year's party for, that the police were holding at a bar that was kind of down the street from where this accident happened. And Deb Kadich made the mistake of saying to the Manitowoc police, if I find out that it was one of you guys, then I'm not going to have any problems, turning your butts in. I'm not covering for you guys on this one. And so she sort of made herself out to be sort of not someone who's going to play ball, and do things, according to the way that the local boss is going to, want them to happen. So, she had sort of rocked the boat enough that they weren't going to let her in there, right? And the excuse that they ended up using, that she was, somehow poisoned by this Manitowoc conflict of interest, absolute horseshit, right? The police are the ones that are compromised, not the coroner. Give me a break, right? The coroner should have been called. Obviously, we've been over it 100 times. Set up the forensic grid to do the correct investigation. They didn't want her anywhere near it because they knew she was not the type of person to play ball with the police, especially if she found, shenanigans. So that there was, it's highly suspect. And what they did to get rid of her was unconscionable.
And I said, oh, yes, you do. It's the law, it's the statute 979. When there is a deceased body or remains, that a coroner or medical examiner are always notified. They handle the medical forensic side of the body. The next day in the morning, I was going to go out to the scene and I was called to a meeting by Sheriff Peterson. I thought, oh, good, I'm finally getting a meeting. I'm finally going to get a update on what's going on and when I will be able to come out to the scene. But when I got there, at that time, I was told I will not be going out to the case. I will not be going out to the scene. And if I do, I will be arrested. And actually, in the state of Wisconsin, the coroner is the top law enforcement official when there is a body or remains. And the coroner is the one who can arrest the sheriff. So he's threatening to arrest me. I could tell he meant it. And when he told me that, I left. I walked out. And then shortly after that, got a call from the county exec. You need to stay out of this conflict of interest because of the Avery case and the $36 million lawsuit. And then it was a few minutes later, I got a call from the county attorney. Deb, you need to stay out of this case because of the conflict of interest and the $36 million lawsuit. And I questioned them. I said, what are other officers doing out there from Manitowoc County when they should not be out there?
I gotta let that resonate a little bit. If I'm not supposed to be out there, then why? And I know that's a little bit of a whataboutism, but this is the crux of the argument that, okay, maybe you make a case. Okay, make the case. Deb shouldn't be there. Then why are Colburn and Lank all over? Why are they the ones finding the key? You know what I mean? Why are they the ones finding all these things? So talk me off my ledge, somebody.
I won't talk you off it. I'll push you off it.
We're going to get a net.
I'm just going to, now this is, there is no right or wrong answer. This is the question I got for the panel and for the chat. It's literal opinion. Got a question. Question is, if Deb was able to proceed in testifying in the trial before she was told that she wasn't warranted and that she had no jurisdiction, there was no need for her, do you think that the direction that Dean and Buting were taking in terms of getting her on the stand and kind of like exploring that conflict of interest and exploring that whole dodginess of the law enforcement, do you think that she could have been impactful? That is my question. Do you think if she was able to testify to everything that she experienced, and especially when it went more and for the whole law enforcement planting and there's some kind of corruption or something was going on under the table, do you think she would have actually been impactful for the jury? Now, I understand again that this is just opinions, but I'm really curious because it's such an interesting element of the case, because we always talk about, the what could have, should have situations and those turning points that, if given the opportunity, it's the make and breaks of these cases that could change the outcome.
Well, I'll take a crack at that, Cal. And like anything, every little point that's added to one side of the scale or the other is like the straw getting loaded on the camel. And this was certainly a straw, right? And you're asking kind of what was the weight of that straw? Was it enough to break the camel's back? I don't know is the answer to that question, but I am sure that it would have done a long way to highlighting the pure hypocrisy of Manitowoc County or Pagel, Kratz, the whole people who are running the show and letting the Manitowoc police in there in the first place. It certainly would have helped put an exclamation point on that hypocrisy of the conflict of interest. So I think that's what they were getting for. They knew there was shenanigans going on. They knew it enough to tell Deb to stay away, but they didn't know it enough to tell the discoverers of the evidence to stay away. What did it broke the camel's back? I don't know. I think there was shenanigans going on in the jury too. We know that one of the jurors who was particularly vocal was the son of, the father, right, of one of the somebody in the Manitowoc police. Did I get that relationship right? Certainly, you can listen to the pre-trial, and that conflict was brought up, and he said, "Oh well, yeah, I think I can manage to be fair about this." But we know from the the juror who left. Was his name Mark as well? I can't remember his last name right now. But he said he was particularly vocal juror who came back, and as soon as the jury first convened, he said, "Oh, he's guilty as hell," right? So we know. We just we have all this stuff ex post facto. We know all this stuff. Can't put it past us. And even the jury itself, I think, was tainted with shenanigans. So was it enough? I don't know. Would it have made a strong point? I think so.
I mean, for me, in a way, I agree. You can't have a what if situation, right? If Deborah Kakach actually testified on the stand and the jury got to hear what she had to say, again, it could have been argued, oh, well, what did Garn say to her, to the judge, or she's just a disgruntled employee. So I'm afraid we can't go with the what if. We have to basically just accept with what happened. But that doesn't stop us now asking the deeper questions. Why was she blocked? Why was she prevented from coming onto the Avery salvage yard? And in actual fact, it's even worse than that. No forensic anthropologist, including Dr. Eisenberg, ever stepped foot on the Avery salvage yard, and no one actually examined the bones in situ. I'm talking about a coroner or a forensic anthropologist. So unfortunately, we can't go with the what ifs. Clearly, she was not a team player, according to Peterson. And maybe she could have revealed shenanigans. Whether it would have had any impact in court, that's a very difficult question to answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think I'm just still shocked by the fact you said you'd push me out of the window or whatever you said, Kel. So I just I don't even know how to respond to this question. Actually, no. I gotta kind of go along with Silkman on this one and say, it's hard. Trying to see what would have been is a difficult one. I could see both ways, but it had to, every person that's called for witness, you would think has some impact on a jury, whether positive or negative. There's probably not going to be a neutral, for them. So my point is that every person that you bring in front of the jury is going to have an impact. How big of an impact? Well, that's to be seen, I guess. It's the best I can do.
It's definitely fair. Everything you guys said was definitely fair, but the honesty that I have to say to that is we base a lot of our opinions and in this case on the what ifs. This isn't the first what if thing that I'm asking for us to explore. A lot of times in majority of the episodes we talk about, well, what if this or what if that, because that's part of the case. If one sliding door moment happened in another direction, we address it. We've made discussions about it. The thing is, for me, we always talk about, again, I agree. I don't know what the outcome would have been. I think, if anything, there could have been more of a favorableness for the defense side, because that we always talk about there's no proof of planting and there's no proof of this corruption. That was the heart of it. They kind of wanted to show that there was shenanigans going on in the law enforcement circle. And I think that if if the jury would have heard her, it might not have been enough, because like Dr. Silkman said, they could just turn around and make it look like she was a disgruntled employee, but it could have created that one thing that the defense team was lacking, and that was the support that there was something going on that law enforcement, very few of them most likely, were doing behind the doors. And I think that was the point that I probably didn't word it correctly for everyone, so apology for that. But I think that was more my perspective of how I was looking at it. Was could she have delivered a powerful testimony that kind of covered the point of the defense team, give them a little bit of strength, because they would get there and then they wouldn't, some areas they didn't cross the line, and she could have been that one witness that eventually gave them that little bit of inside knowledge that there was more discussions that the state were trying to let on.
After you say it like that a little bit, and I've had a second to think about it, let's put it this way. It wouldn't have hurt the defense. Let's put it that way. Even if she comes across disgruntled, even if she's like, well, who's this woman? She's disgruntled. Well, she must have had something to be upset about. Seems like things aren't all on the up and up here at Manitowoc. Why isn't the coroner allowed in? And I think it would have been hard for Ken Kratz to counter that, and just otherwise it would seem like he was attacking her. And hey, maybe that would have had a good effect too. If it seemed like Ken Kratz was beating up on her too much, they'd be like, what's wrong with this prosecutor? Why is he going after this woman so hard? She's just trying to do her job. So in that sense, I guess Jeff, the best I could say is it couldn't have hurt him. Couldn't have hurt him.
But Jeff, to tell you the truth, I don't think the jury was that sophisticated to understand the shenanigans that were happening in the background. You essentially needed either stranglebuting to give a very powerful summation at the end, essentially exposing the shenanigans that took place as part of this so-called investigation. You needed to point to the judge and to the jury, hey, look, they blocked the coroner. They didn't take photographs. We've got incomplete reports. We've got all these things which are missing. They don't want to talk about Cuss Road. They don't want to talk about the bones at the Manitowoc County gravel pit. Why? Why? How come there's nothing about the dogs? There's very little information about the cadaver dogs, very little information about the bloodhounds. In fact, Sarah Faust was not even called to the stand. But you needed someone to encapsulate all the shenanigans. This didn't take place, in my opinion, right? But I agree with what Kelly said. It's a very, very good question. We cannot answer it because, unfortunately, Deborah never had her day in court.
Just to throw it out there, just to be cheeky, but the only cross-examination that I could see that Ken Kratz would settle with if Deb did take the stand was, and how many bodies have you kicked throughout your years of experience? Because isn't that what he likes to state, that is the coroner's role, is they only go there just to kick the body and say they're dead?
Yeah, correct. But it represents to me, Kelly, the height of disrespect. But not only that, not only disrespect, but also to diminish the role of the state, their own coroner, to diminish the role of the coroner. And so that power went to Dr. Eisenberg. She's the smartest woman I know, yada, yada. And yet she refused to classify a bone fragment in the Manitowoc County gravel pit as being human. She said it was suspect, possible human, because I absolutely guarantee you that Kratz approached her and coached her and said, don't you dare give a definitive answer. Just say possible suspect, because that from the state's forensic anthropologist could have indeed turned the case. It really could have. It could have made the jury think of deeper questions. What on earth would Stephen Avery be depositing some of her cremains in the Manitowoc County gravel pit and not the whole lot? Clean up. right? Because if he expunged Teresa Halbach from his trailer and garage, why leave the bones? Why leave the car? It honestly, it makes no sense. You shake your head in disbelief that the jury were trying to buy this bullshit from Kratz.
There. I said, I've never been involved in a previous Avery case. My office is separate from the sheriff's department, and it just ended by that. I never did get out to the scene. I was never given any information. I was never allowed to do my job. I was supposed to be an advocate for Teresa. That was my goal. And when you can't do that, you just have this bad feeling that you failed. You failed that person.
Now, isn't that incredible reverse psychology? She felt a failure to help Teresa Halbach and her family. And what did all the investigators say on TV and in the media? Think of the Halbach family. Remember what Brad Schimmel said about the possible release of Brendan Dassey? Think of the Halbach family. And here we have the state's coroner in fucking tears saying, I failed in my jurisdiction of helping the Halbach family. Guys, you cannot get any lower than that.
There's no coroner there. There was no forensic anthropologist or medical examiner.
The defense calls him as Deborah Kakich.
When I walked into the courtroom and took the stand, Attorney Kratz, he just looked at me, just staring me down. That told me the whole story.
Did you, in November of 2005, come to learn of some suspected human bones found on or near the Avery property in Manitowoc County?
Yes, I did.
How did you learn about that?
From television.
What did you do after you saw on television something about the discovery of possible human remains?
Well, I got a few phone calls, and particularly from my deputies as to what the plan of action would be.
Remember Kratz and the voicemail calls? He wanted the jury out. Isn't that incredible, guys?
And they got the same. They got the same result from Judge Willis too, that they needed the exact irrational ruling that they didn't need to hear any further evidence. In the case of the phones, it was it's irrelevant who may have deleted Teresa's voicemail, not pertinent to the case. What? And then in this case, is we're gonna hear that the disgruntled employee doesn't have anything valuable to add. Both of which are just bullshit rulings. Let's call it what it is.
And I would ask you, what is the relevancy of this? The Manitowoc County Corporation Council wanted to remove all Manitowoc County officials from this investigation, and to come in now because perhaps some disgruntled Manitowoc County employee didn't like that decision. I don't see the relevancy at all of this.
Neither Ms. Kakich nor the Office of Coroner, nor anyone in the coroner's office had any prior involvement in Stephen Avery's civil lawsuit, hadn't been deposed, hadn't been interviewed, had no statutory responsibilities for the 1985 crime, and yet her office was walled off entirely from performing its lawful duties in connection with the discovery of human remains.
I don't see how anything the coroner would have done would have somehow contributed to a less biased investigation in this.
You know who was driving all the bias? The judge. The judge. The judge was driving the bias.
Right. I mean, just the fallaciousness of that statement is we highlight that if there was a forensic coroner there would have been a grid, there would have been in situ pictures, you know. So I guess I don't even understand what he's saying when he said, oh, the presence of the coroner wouldn't have made a difference. Is kind of what he's summary, but
contributed to a bias. You know what I mean? How would it made it less bias by having her there? And you know, I think that this is not I think that this is a question that needs to be more formally explored, maybe in legislation, to say, okay, there's a process set up when a county or a jurisdiction recuses themselves for whatever reason, that includes the coroner, and this is the process that we do under this, or it doesn't include the coroner, and this is the process that we do when this happens. Because it seems like when you hand over the investigation to Calumet, you kind of give this like wishy-washy, well, we don't really know who's in. We could use your coroner, or we could use our medical examiner, or we could maybe that these laws need to be clear on if you're going to, and so maybe this is something that could have been litigated further. I don't know. That's not a question for me to really, maybe I shouldn't even be asking it, because a lawyer will come by and squash my question like a bug, which has happened many times before. We did kind of let the time run away with us on this one. I was just so involved in I didn't realize it. It's kind of that time, Big Jeff. Looking like we're headed into some wrap-up comments. So I will throw it back over to you to see what you can do to wrap this up in a nice special iPad case that won't break when Dr. Silkman smashes it.
Well, I think the panel covered a lot of ground today. We saw Kathleen Zellner more and more convinced of that the narrative that she is putting together is one that fits all of the elements of the evidence that she's aware of. And I think we kind of have the foresight on the panel to know that every single thing that she has is not exactly 100% the way that she thinks it is right now, as she's doing in this video. But it is always good to see her, what I say, at her finest. She's taking the high road, right? It's always important to her to find the actual person that did the crime, and her narrative is sort of based on that. We saw her discussion with the burn expert, and the evidence of the bones and the cremains, what's there, what's in the burn pit, what's elsewhere. We had a great discussion on the kerf marks. The evidence of the cremains just doesn't make sense as to where everything is located. And moving on to the coroner, which is the last part that we just saw. It just shows the shenanigans of the combined Calumet Manitowoc machine that conspired to let every single Manitowoc officer in there, but also conspired not to let the one person who probably didn't have any conflict of interest at all, kept her as far away as possible because she was a known non-ball player, and certainly would have forced things to be done a lot differently with regard to the discovery of evidence, which is exactly what Manitowoc and Calumet did not want in their attempt to frame Stephen. So probably sounded a little bit discombobulated, but back over to you and on to the next.
Absolutely, on to the next. No, I don't think it's discombobulated. This episode's been all over the place. We covered a lot of ground. I feel like we got whiplash sometimes there, Big Jeff. We'll hand it over to Dr. Silkman for your summation, if you wouldn't.
Again, to me, when I see this material, it really is an opportunity lost. And Kelly proposed a really great question about what would happen if the coroner had actually gone on the stand and gave her story. I ask a deeper question. What would have happened if Deborah Kakach and her team was actually at the burn pit on November the 8th, processing it? Would the outcome for Stephen and Brendan would have been different, right? That to me is the greater question. I thoroughly enjoyed the episode. It was very controversial and great discussion by everyone. And I hope everyone in chat enjoyed it. Thank you so much, guys.
Well, thank you, Dr. Silkman. And we will most definitely never forget again to throw it over to Kel and give it to Kel. You have the pleasure, honor, and responsibility of leading us out of episode 45.
I've got nothing to say. You guys summed everything up. Yeah, listen, we covered a lot of ground. There was from Kathleen Zellner all the way through to obviously Deb. And of course, I threw in that question in there, which I completely understand. There would have been no answer to it. It's just something that we could kind of, you know, as team panels and, you know, people in chat to kind of digest, you know, the importance that she could have brought. And I think hearing that last statement from Judge Willis, where he said, you know, respectfully, he said, I don't see how, you know, the coroner could have changed or what she could have brought forward. And then in terms of the biasm, and that is what I was trying to capture. Here is the defense team this entire time whose their defense is that law enforcement, you know, set up Stephen Avery. That is their defense. They have got a witness here, an expert witness that was willing to take the stand and talk about how the investigation was being steered and how she was not allowed to be a part of it. And that influence of her presence could have altered the outcome, and that's what they were trying to prevent. That is the whole point of why I was like, could she have made an impact? Because it would have been that first real time in the case, or especially the trial, that we would have seen someone supporting the defense narrative and their strategy that law enforcement planted or framed Stephen Avery. And that is why I posed the question. Completely respect the answers, and I just want to thank everyone for coming as always, and I will see you all next week.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kel, and we'll see everybody next week. I really appreciate everybody out there in live chat who has been chatting along with us for the last year and a half plus, 45 episodes in this season alone, really closing out the end. We've only got a few weeks left. I really can't say enough about everybody out there. So for Dr. Silkman, for Kel, Big Jeff, and for Jack at home, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.